Good morning.
Morning.
Good morning, David. Can you hear us?
Now I can, yep.
Yes.
Who are you?
How about that?
Am I on?
Stacy's been teaching us how to blur our backgrounds. So
Now, Stacy has some pretty cool backgrounds.
Somehow I lost them. I have to pull those back up, my cooler backgrounds. Now we have
You had that nice cabinet on the wall.
bookshelf. I was talking about that. I love that bookshelf. I gotta find that. I don't know what happened to it.
All right, so let's get started. Welcome to the July 24th, 2023 meeting of the Maine Commission on Governmental Ethics and Election Practices. We have Commissioner Marble and myself here in person, and Commissioners Newman and Hastings and Leclerc are remote. So let's move to agenda item 1, which is the ratification of meeting minutes from May 31st, 2023. And I've looked at these. I'll move that they are ratified as written. Second. Is there any discussion? All in favor? Well, I'll have to call roll because we've got people vote. So Commissioner Marble? Yes. Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
yes.
I'll vote yes as well. On to agenda item 2, discrepancies in cash balances of political action committees. And I'll turn to Jonathan for some guidance.
Sure, I'll provide a little context and then, but really most of the work on this project has been done by Emma Burke and we're very grateful for her efforts. So she'll fill you in on all the details.
We are grateful for that.
So for at least a decade, when candidates and PACs file campaign finance reports with our office, a PDF is developed by the system based on all the contributions and expenditures that they have entered digitally. And on the cover page of the report is something called the financial activity summary. And it reports to show various totals of the contributions received in the period and the expenditures made. And one element of it is that based on those transactions, it shows a cash balance at end of period. And speaking for myself, this has been a part of our reporting for a long time. I have always hoped that PACs look at that cash balance at end of period and use it as a clue to see whether or not their transactions have been accurate or not. And if it's way off, they might make some self-corrections. But we hadn't really made any affirmative efforts to ask PACs to focus in on that until 3 years ago, when Emma's predecessor, Michael Dunn, did that in kind of a voluntary way. So at least on a couple of occasions when reports were about to be filed or just filed, he would send out an email that said, hey, this is the cash balance at the beginning of the period or the end of the period. I can't remember how he phrased it. And could you please let us know if the balance doesn't really reflect what's in your bank account? And he heard from some, he didn't hear from others. And it was sort of a voluntary check that we hope people would take advantage of. And then at the beginning of this year, some new reforms took effect. So Emma Burke really firmly and persistently impressed upon PACs that we wanted to see that cash balance be correct. And her results are shown in the staff memo. But that was really the first time we were really firm about it. And one contributing factor to this is that in 2018 and 2019, we had a new campaign finance system, and our tech vendor, some of the totals in that financial activity summary were not correct. And we knew that they weren't correct, and it was very frustrating for us. And sometimes we would share the frustration with the people who filed the reports. And but I think they were largely or entirely taken care of by 2019. So it was really in 2020 that we felt we could trust the cash balance. And that's what prompted Michael to take it more seriously. So what Emma's going to present to you today is that she's been working with the PACs. For three of them, we're recommending that the commission staff enter an adjustment into the reporting so that we can get their cash balances correct. We think these three PACs have made a genuine effort to try to look for discrepancies and have made a reasonable effort, and this is sort of what we think would be appropriate. There's one other thing I want to cover, though. We did raise the possibility that maybe one report would be considered late, and that belongs to the House Democratic Campaign Committee, and a representative of the PAC is here today to talk to you. So I just want to give you a little bit more information about that. They, at the beginning of the year, they started out with a discrepancy of 68,833. And then, as the PAC can tell you, they did sort of a self-assessment or self-audit. And they found that there was a report filed 7 years ago in July 2016, which kind of re-reported contributions that had been, they had previously reported in April and June. They reported them again in July. So that resulted in the balance being $54,000 above what it should have been. And so they did this, they went back 7 years of transactions, discovered this. So sort of under pressure from us, they did this self-audit, and they've come forward and said, this is the reason for most of the discrepancy. Right now, they only have discrepancy of $14,000. We raised the issue that you could consider this report from July 2016 to be late. My own personal view is that there are factors on both sides of that. It's an old report. We rarely go back 7 years to say, aha, you made an error, or, you know, this was substantially not conforming to the requirements, but you can take that action, and we can, if you want to later on, we can look at the statute that would support that. But what I wanted to convey is that this is a PAC that is rarely late, rarely has enforcement problems, and they're one of our largest PACs. They raise, every 2-year election cycle, they raise more than $500,000 and spend more than $500,000 to promote Democratic candidates for the State House of Representatives. And I think that the fact that they're, after those many years of activity, they only have a discrepancy of 12,000 is an indicator objectively that they do take the reporting seriously. But we wish they had attended to this particular issue sooner. But overall, it's a compliant PAC, is what I guess I'm going to say. Thank you very much. And
Terrific.
Yeah.
Thank you. Ms. Burke, would you like to come forward?
Sure.
Just
A couple of questions. First, Emma, I'm sorry, but come up.
Okay.
I just want to make sure of a couple of things. In essence, when you boil down through all of this, is this a matter of the commission looking at the PACs supplying information compared to their own information, in essence? I mean, this isn't like looking at a third-party rendition of someone's finances with what that person is reporting and saying, okay, there's a difference here. You're basically looking at what they are reporting.
Right, that's correct.
Okay. And my other question is, other than their donors and the election commission, is there any other entity in any kind of standing with oversight on any of this?
No, I mean, we're the only oversight, like governmental agency that has oversight over this. We think there's a certain amount of private information that comes our way that could tip us off to non-compliance. So for example, we think most of the PACs that are based in Maine do take this seriously, and we do rely on them to sort of self-disclose if they've made errors, and that does happen. So even though we can't identify errors, they identify them for us sometimes, and sometimes it results in penalties. Also, there's sort of, they check up on each other. And, you know, so if there are errors in the financial reporting, they can be brought to our attention that way. But
Okay.
we're the only agency that has the regulatory power to look at this.
And I think I'd add, though, that if there's anything criminal involved, that the AG's office could
Absolutely. Yeah.
certainly look at.
Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
I should have asked before, does anybody else have any questions for Jonathan before we talk to Ms. Berg? Yes, Ms. Newman.
I just had to clarify a question for the 2016. Oh, that was basically, that was 54,000 was over reporting, correct?
That's correct.
It was reported twice, I think, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks for clarifying that.
Any other questions for
No.
Mr. Wayne? Okay, Ms. Burke.
Good morning.
Morning.
So I undertook this very fun project, which was to make sure that every single PAC So as you probably know that during off years, as we call them, non-election years, PACs have to file 4 reports, quarterly reports. So my goal was, after the January quarterly report was filed in 2023, so that was the ending of reporting for 2022, because it goes through December 31st, was to try to get every single PAC to have an exactly correct balance by the time they filed their first report for 2023 activity, which was the April quarterly. As you now know, it's July, so didn't go quite to plan, but the good news was is we did get confirmation or get slight amendments and balance changes done to about 110 PACs to get their balance to be according to them and their bank records to be exact. So as you were saying, there isn't any other third party. We don't have another auditor, a third party auditor come in. I work with the PACs, they go through their bank records, and typically in communication with me, they would try to figure out what is the best way to make the amendments. How do we make these changes? For adjustments of less than $1,000, I can put in a transaction to either subtract or add funds to the campaign so their balance was accurate.
So that our records reflect what the actual balance is.
Exactly, yes. There were some PACs that had much larger discrepancies, and these PACs were typically the PACs that have either been around for more than 20 years and or have hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars over those years going in and out, which means even a discrepancy of $50,000, $60,000 is overall a very small percentage of their activity. So most of the PACs tried, I would actually say all the PACs have tried very hard to find the reasons for their discrepancies. And we've had good luck with folks working on them, and one PAC in mine has actually hired a third party auditor to come in and try to help them correct their books. So that is where we're at right now. So we have 4 that are being discussed today, 4 or 5, I'm sorry, I think 4.
Oh, I'm making wrong. I thought it was 3 adjustments, but the memo refers to
Oh,
7.
it's because
I think it was a total of 5.
yeah, so that's because one of them was basically a status update on a House United, which you have worked on and is going to be fixed by the folks themselves, and so they do not need either a balance adjustment, nor are we looking at any kind of enforcement action. They're just still pending. It's the speakers of the House PAC, so obviously a slightly busy individual. So we gave them extra time in past session to get that corrected. The reasoning for this was, the main goal for this was, not only am I a data nerd and really need numbers to be accurate, but also that for a short amount of time, we had a new law in effect prohibiting business entity contributions, which meant even if a PAC had funds from a business entity, they could not then use those funds to donate to a leadership PAC or a candidate. So it's exceptionally important that all campaigns, committees going into 2023 had an exact, accurate number, so we knew what funds were 2022 and older and what were new, and what could be donated to candidates and leadership PACs. That law was repealed as emergency last month, so that law is no longer in effect. But it was a good stimulus to getting this project done. So the one PAC that really is going to be discussed today, as far as a possible waiver transaction, but excuse me, not waiver transaction, a balance adjustment transaction, is the House Democratic Campaign Committee. Sean Smith is here. He is the principal officer of the PAC. And so we have had a lot of communications about this situation. They put in a ton of hard work. They started at more than $60,000 in discrepancies. They have found 54,000 and change, leaving them with about a $14,000 discrepancy. So I think it makes sense now, unless you guys have any questions for me, that if you want to speak to Mr. Smith about HDCC, and then any other questions you have for me along the way, I'm happy to answer.
Sure, let's see if there are questions. Commissioner Berman.
Just to put this to rest, you're referencing the House United Act
Yeah,
and a June 14th phone call, but it sounds like you've continued to work, obviously, before this meeting. So in your mind, that's resolved. We're not here to really focus on that.
no, so I do not believe amendments have been made yet.
Yeah.
They have been
They
made,
have.
okay. So yes, they are all set.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings.
Thank you. Emma, I just have a question. Were the PACs, did you ask the PAC to provide you with written evidence of their balances or just of some sort of a confirmation?
Yes, so I sent my first email went out on February 7th and it stated, so an email was sent to each principal officer and each treasurer and it stated, this is your current balance. If this is your current balance, please let me know that it's accurate. If this does not match your bank account as of December 31st, 2022, you have to let me know and you have to let me know what that balance is so we can get working on getting it corrected. So I guess technically it didn't fully require people to state that in an email. I did get a few phone calls, but pretty much everything did take place via email.
Okay, so the 80 that confirmed their balances matched just told you that with an email or something like that.
Yes.
Thank you.
Other questions for Ms. Burke? Okay, Mr. Smith, I don't want to waste your time or anything, but I think it might make more sense to work through the couple of them that might be more readily disposed of before we get to the house. What's that?
I'll head on back for now.
Well, why don't you lead us through them?
So we have, I don't remember the exact order, so we have the Maine Senate Republican Majority PAC. I believe their balance is actually, so PACs have now filed their April quarterly and they actually just filed their July quarterly reports as well. So since these initial balance discrepancy numbers came in, thank you. After their initial balance discrepancy amounts came in, they have filed 2 reports. So their balance discrepancies are not the exact same anymore. As far as I'm aware of, Maine Senate Republican Majority's balance is actually, their discrepancy is actually lower than it was initially. I think it's, last I talked to the treasurer, it's down to about $7,000.
Okay, it was about 7,000.
Yeah. So that is where they're at. I do know the treasurer, Ashley Lushke, that she spent a lot of time going back, but again, this was probably at least 5+ years ago. Another PAC that has been around for at least 2 decades has gone through 2 e-filing website changes. So numbers have been transposed twice through the system. Overall, we feel like most people weren't affected greatly by this, but we certainly can't say that they weren't affected at all by this. So even though, so she has been exceptionally communicative with me and we feel that their balance adjustment should be approved because they've put in a lot of work overall. That's a relatively small amount for the amount of money they've had come in and come out.
And you don't think there's any chance of finding where the discrepancy came from?
No, she's exceptionally detail oriented. She's very good at her job. She's one of those people who it really bothers her that she's had a balance discrepancy that they can't find. And I know that she has spent a good amount of time looking and can't locate it, which typically means it's probably small amounts over a lot of reports and would be very difficult to find in a way that would greatly lower this number.
Any other questions for Ms. Burke about, yes?
This is kind of a general question, but hi, Emma. Is this something that you're going to be doing annually now? So that you don't get these kind of years old issues?
Yeah, I think it's something that I plan on doing in the start of every off year. So give folks, so not during the election year, but give folks time to breathe. And then they have the January quarterly reports, which will basically account through the end of the year of the election year. and then having everyone account at that time to make sure their balances are accurate. I am hoping by being so direct and consistently following up, which I did via email to make sure every single PAC responded to me, is I'm hoping that it does kind of start us in a new direction that balances stay more accurate now.
Okay, thank you. Thank you very much.
Commissioner Newman, did you have a question?
That was my same question, was how often is this or will it be done? So thank you.
Commissioner Hastings?
Thank you. I seem to recall the commission being, receiving an auditor's report at least once or twice during my tenure. Is that just of campaign accounts that the auditor looks at, or do we look into PACs at all in our audit?
So the auditor reports that you are getting are for audits of main clean election candidates. And that is the only type of entity, at least in my memory, that we've had the third-party auditor come in and audit, yeah. So typically, any quote-unquote auditing work they've done was done by either Michael Dunn or would be on myself, most likely.
So we only do audits on campaigns,
On clean election campaigns, yes.
election.
But I don't know why we couldn't ask for or direct an audit of a PAC like this.
No, I don't. There is like a general authorization to the commission to engage in audits and investigations, so we could. And in fact, we had a problem with a couple of leadership PACs about 6 or 8 years ago, close together, and the commission at that time charged the staff with doing some sort of enhanced compliance review or audit of all leadership PACs. And we did do that, and we found very few errors, which isn't to say we shouldn't do it, but that the results were very good on that occasion. So that would have been some dozens of PACs. But other than that, we haven't.
But for example, if one of these PACs was particularly troublesome, we could direct an audit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. And we either could attempt to do it ourselves, or we do have an audit contract with a private auditor. Right now, they're sort of overdue to give you some results on their audits of the main clean election candidates, and I hope to do that in August, by the way. But we could modify the contract to ask them to do it. I think if you're going to direct the staff to do it, the one thing to keep in mind is staff constraints on our time. You know, in particular, Emma is responsible for, her purview includes 110 PACs, some ballot question committees that are very, very large, dozens of local committees, and then about 300 lobbyist reports come in every month. So she really has her hands full,
Sure.
but it's not to say she couldn't do some selected PAC.
I suspect she's been sleeping for a couple hours a day.
Yeah.
Sometimes.
Anyway, I every so often a legislator will propose, well, why can't you guys do PACs? And this is sort of a standard thing that I bring out. Like, we're not
Sure.
unwilling, but there
Sure.
are limits to how many people we have here who we could dedicate to that. Yeah.
And we don't have any certified auditors either, do we?
On our staff, no.
Yeah.
we don't.
Yeah, I mean, and I would say that skill-wise, I would certainly be able to do a basic audit as far as receiving records from a PAC and doing cross-checking and, lining it up with the reports and finding either duplications or things that weren't reported. But as far as, if we wanted to look into one PAC intensely over a few years, I mean, that's obviously a lot of time. So it's not something that could be done by me solely for a number of PACs every year.
Yeah, sure, no, I understand. Commissioner,
So watch out, not trying to make more work for you, actually trying to make less. Which sounds like me telling you how to do your job, which is not what I'm trying to do at all. If I boil all this down right now, given old and new PACs, old iterations, current and everything else, are they, or are you looking at like the last thing from last year and the cash on hand at the beginning of this Is that sort of what this comes down to?
Well, so for this project, it was definitely, some people had to go back 5, 7, 8 years.
Right.
Moving forward, it would hopefully only be because we got everyone accurate in the springtime or the first half of 2023, would only be going back a couple of years.
Okay, but I'm not asking my question well enough. Going forward,
Mhm,
if I'm running a PAC, if I'm the agent for the PAC,
mhm.
could I be instructed, hey, buddy, look at this bottom line in December of 22, and this number you reported in April of 23. Can it be that simple going forward?
I mean, I can certainly ask that and require PACs to answer me in the affirmative or negative and say, yes, it matches, no, it doesn't. The one obstacle to that for me would be if someone has a discrepancy and does not know or cannot find it.
Right.
And that's where some PACs have the folks with the ability to do that, or have the financial ability and wherewithal to hire an auditor to come in and do that.
Okay, but if we get to the point where you are in agreement with PAC A,
Mhm.
2 years from now, stuff is going on. I'm trying to make your life easier and report to the public with veracity.
Yeah,
But if they had to report and say, yep, December's number doesn't equal April's number by 4,000, we see that. It's better than you're having to point everything out almost on an individual basis and tell them where to start looking and all those things,
yeah.
especially with newer PACs.
So part of when they file a report on the e-filing site, there is an affirmation statement they have to check okay to at the end that says everything on this report is accurate to the
Right.
best of my knowledge, and don't know the exact wording off the top of my head. So when PACs agree to that, when it's the principal officer, the treasurer, whomever filing the report, we are all operating under the assumption that that balance is accurate because you have filed an accurate report. So
Are they looking at December's numbers versus April's?
I would hope so, but there's nothing that directs them to, other than their
Okay,
own.
I would just simply suggest take that thought 3 days from now under advisement and do with it what you wish. Again, not trying to tell you how to do your
Yeah,
job.
I understand what you mean.
Okay,
Well, the beauty of what you're doing now is that it should create a floor
Yes,
after which everything will be reconciled. And, you know, some of the problems that go back 6, 8 years.
right,
That won't be an issue going forward.
right. We have a much smaller window. So let's say in a year from now that I have a pack, it's like all of a sudden then $7,000 off. And I don't know why. It's like, we know that it can't be later than this period of time.
Exactly. So I think that's an additional benefit from what
Yes.
you're doing.
Yes, it makes it a much more approachable problem.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah, Commissioner Hastings.
Well, I understand then that when all these PACs file their report, whoever files it checks a box and says, yes, in fact, the balance shown on this report is accurate as to what we have in the bank. But I'm looking and it looks like about 30 of them were not accurate. They were some off, were off to some degree.
Yeah.
But they all certified that the balances match what the report shows.
So the affirmation statement that they agree to doesn't have the words exactly about that it needs to match the bank statement. It just is a slightly more vague statement that the report itself is true and accurate and complete to the best of their knowledge. There can be weirdness overall between one quarterly report to the next report about whether it matches the bank account because of when activity actually happens, particularly contributions, because they're supposed to report contributions on the date they accept them, not the date they deposit them. And sometimes when you're in a busier time of year, right around a primary or something like that, is you're not getting the chance to go to the bank all the time. And so sometimes the bank balance is not going to be accurate day to day to day to the bank account to the reports. And that, I mean, in every PAC treasurer I've spoken to said, you know, it's very frustrating because it doesn't always quite match because of pending activity that hasn't occurred yet in the bank account. So report to report, it would be more difficult. What we're looking for is an overall accuracy.
Any other questions for Ms. Burke? Okay, I'll move that that we permit the staff to adjust our records to match the actual balance in the Maine Senate Republican majority PAC.
Second.
Is there discussion about that? And my reasoning is that Ms. Burke has already done a lot of work on it, and I don't believe that that there's going to be any benefit to any further work on this. Any other discussion? Okay, we'll have a vote. Commissioner Marble?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. Okay, let's move on to the next.
All right, so the other PAC that the staff has recommended a balance adjustment transaction be approved is for the Maine Optometric Association PAC. So again, this is a PAC that I believe is more than 20 years old. Yeah, 2002. And over that time have reported over $100,000 in contributions. They have found themselves off by about $4,500. The treasurer, Caroline, has worked immensely hard on this, and I could be incorrect, but from my understanding, this obviously is just like a side gig for her. She has a full-time job. I believe she works for an eye doctor's office or association. So this is, you know, like a volunteer thing she does. And she has attempted to find the issues. There were some amendments made to get this discrepancy down to this, so she did make some changes. She did send me some spreadsheets that she created of where she thought some errors were. Unfortunately, I couldn't quite figure out what she was trying to convey to me. So again, she's gone through the records, but she also started a few years ago, so she's quite sure, looking at her reporting activity with the bank records that were most familiar to her, that her reporting has been accurate, and it goes back to before her time, and much older, where she doesn't have as much access to the bank records, and she is not sure if she can find any more information. So again, this represents a very small amount of money overall for the PAC, and they have been mostly reporting accurately for the past 5 years since Caroline took over. So we just don't know what the benefit would be of asking, you know, this very nice, hardworking person to go back and do more work on this, with the likelihood of success being pretty low.
Any questions?
This one's gonna make a motion.
Oh, okay. Any other questions? Please do.
I move that we approve a balance adjustment as recommended by staff to the Maine Optometric Association.
I'll second that. Any discussion of the motion? Okay, let's vote. Commissioner Marble?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
And I'll also vote yes.
I gotta let the dog out.
That finally answers the question. Who let the dog out?
David Hastings was not my guess.
Good one.
I thought it was a euphemism.
Now I want to see the dog.
It's out.
She's out.
Too late.
Okay, yeah.
So the other PAC we have to discuss today is the House Democratic Campaign Committee, which will most likely be referred to now on as HDCC. The principal officer of HDCC is Sean Smith, who is here, and the treasurer, Steve Von Voigt. So again, they have been in existence for a little over 20 years. And since then, their overall cash activity between ins and outs has been close to $12 million. I believe they are the most, if not one of the most active financially active PACs we have. So the history with this one is a little bit longer, so I'll explain that a little bit. So when I sent my email out on February 7th, it went to both Mr. Smith, the principal officer, and Mr. Von Voigt, the treasurer. Again, my email stated, you know, I need to know your balances are exactly accurate. Please reply to me confirming if they are or are not. In under an hour, Mr. Von Voigt responded back to me that he said, okay, you know, it looks fine to me. It looks okay to me. That did surprise me a little bit, mainly just because it is such an active PAC with large balances, but you know, I went with it. And then it was March 31st that Mr. Smith called me to discuss both a House United PAC that he is the treasurer of, and HDCC, and in that phone call mentioned to me HDCC's balance discrepancy of, you know, I think it was $68,000 at the time. So that surprised me because from beginning of February to March 31st, it was my understanding that their balance was essentially accurate. So that then started them on the path of, okay, you need to try to figure this out. What is the likelihood you figure this out? The initial response we got was, we'll go looking, we'll try to find stuff, but we don't know how much we'll be able to find. There was an understanding that a balance discrepancy had existed for many years and most likely predated, so was in the last e-filing database we had and potentially went back to the one we had before then. We switched. We went to a new e-filing system in December 2013. That was right before I started. And then we switched again in July of 2018. So again, with the length of this PAC, they've had a lot of money and a lot of data be transposed twice. The first 2 years we had this new e-filing system, there were definitely a lot of issues with balances and numbers being reported and the math essentially being accurate, which was a consternation to everyone. So the initial explanation of probably a lot of this comes from that. I honestly believed, I thought that was reasonable, but they kept looking, Mr. Smith and his staff kept looking, and they were able to find on the 42-day post-general report, which was filed in July of 2016, that about $54,000 of contributions was reported again in that report, and they have been reported both in the 11-day pre-primary and the would have been April quarterly. From my understanding and assumption of what happened, and Mr. Smith can certainly correct me if I'm wrong, what most likely happened is contributions were reported with their acceptance date as they came in, and I think the checks were deposited. All of the duplicate contributions were reported with the date of June 18th, 2016. So I was assuming that perhaps that was the date those checks were actually deposited, and that's why they all have the same date. Certainly not all of the contributions on the April quarterly or 11-day pre-primary were reported again. It was overall actually a small amount. It was a 17, I think, contributions that were duplicate reported. So those amendments have not been made yet. We were waiting to see how today goes. Also, it's something I would be more comfortable doing because it is such old data. I want to make sure the system is playing nice when these are made. When those amendments are made, ostensibly it should bring their balance discrepancy down to a much lower between $12,000 to $14,000. So overall, we do feel as a staff that it would make sense for them to have a balanced transaction input to after the amendments are made to bring their balance to accurate. So it would be an adjustment again of about $12,000 to $14,000. whether that July report would be considered substantially non-conforming and late is a potential enforcement action for you to consider. I mean, overall, Mr. Smith and I, we've been working together for almost my entire 10 years here, between working with candidates and now working with campaigns. He works very hard to make sure reports are accurate. And I know that it is something they are very unhappy with, that they've had this balanced transaction and that they are now before you today because of it. So that is the information I have for you on that.
Great, thank you. Are there questions for Ms. Burke about this?
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
This is again, a procedural question.
Mhm.
When you do all this work, when we sanction adjustments, what is the record keeping going forward about that? Would a different employee here 3 years from now readily see that action was taken in 2023?
So when I enter the balance transactions into the system is I don't have a fancy admin way of doing it. Is essentially I have to create an expenditure or I have to create a contribution. And I make sure that in the description of the transaction that it says this was a staff approved balance adjustment, you know, done by this person or on this date. So it does, so the public clearly understands it's not real money, if you will, coming in and going out. It's a correction item. Any form, future staff looking back at this time would see that as well. And I also personally kept a very detailed spreadsheet of every single pack of what their balance should have been, what they reported it was, and what it was changed by, either through amendments on their part or adjustments made by me.
Thank you.
Yes.
Other questions for Ms. Burke? Mr. Smith, would you like to come forward and address this? Please introduce yourself.
Yeah, of course. Hi, good morning, everybody. My name is Sean Smith. I'm the Executive Director of the House Democratic Campaign Committee. I work for House leadership and all the Democrats in the House. Our job is to oversee all 151 House districts every 2 years. I've worked for the House Democrats since 2008, and I've been in my current position as director since 2011. I'm on my 7th cycle now. I've also worked twice in the State House and helped with overseeing the redistricting effort on behalf of House Democrats in 2013 and 2021. I live in Bangor, my wife and 2 small children. So this is my first time ever addressing you. So it's nice to see all of you. I do watch all of your meetings. And although I don't know you very well, I do have a very close relationship with a lot of the ethics staff members who are wonderful. So it's nice to be here. I'm here to discuss 2 issues with you today. One is the balance discrepancy adjustment, and the second one is the consideration of this 2016 report, which had inaccuracies. So as Emma said, in February, she emailed all the PACs and asked for the accurate balances, which, you know, I think was to get everything back into line, but also because of LD 1417, which was passed by the 130th legislature, which has now been repealed. All the money before, you know, that was in the bank prior to December 31st would be not subject to this new law. All the money in after would be, and so it was important to be very precise. And so we, as Emma said, we responded to her at the end of March, and we let her know that we had a $68,000 discrepancy, which, you know, I think we were surprised by and that we found. But, you know, we matched up the ethics reports at the end of 2022, our bank account, and gave her the precise amount that we were off. You know, there were several phone conversations with her, with Jonathan, emails with Martha, trying to figure out exactly what we should do about this. You know, we thought that there might be an e-filing error over the few different systems over the years. We also knew that the last time we actually reset our PAC balance with the Ethics Commission was with the beginning of the new system back in 2013. So since then, you know, it had been 10 years, $11.4 million of transactions. And it wasn't just the amount of transactions, it was like the volume of transactions that had been entered over 100 reports. So we tried to figure out what to do. And they were great in talking to us through it, and their advice was for us to go back and dig and see what we could find. And Jonathan's advice was to go back to July 1st of 2018, which I think was around when the new filing system came online, and see what we can find. So that's exactly what we did. So myself, our treasurer, Steve On Vogt, who wanted to be here today, but he's traveling to see a sick friend in Pittsburgh. For those of you who know, Steve's a great guy. And our finance director developed an internal audit process where we could go back and try to figure out where this discrepancy came from. And what we first found out was that when we went back to July of 2018, almost an equal discrepancy that we have now existed then. So that immediately told us that whatever the discrepancy was prior to July 1st, 2018. But we were all set, ready to do this audit. And so we did it anyway from July 1st, 2018 through the end of 2022. And surprisingly and encouragingly, we didn't find anything. So that's when we decided to go back as far as our bank records went back, which was 7 years, to 2017 and to 2016. And what we found pretty quickly was a couple of larger duplicate contributions on the 2016 42-day post-primary report. So that, of course, led us to look at the beginning of 2016 and scrutinize all of those records. And again, what we found pretty quickly was that there were 17 transactions that were listed timely and accurately, either on the April quarterly report, the first quarter report of 2016, or on the 11-day pre-primary report, that for some reason were duplicated on the 2016 42-day report. We don't know why this happened. It was 7 years ago. I mean, I can't even remember what that e-filing system looked like. I was trying to think in my head what happened. I mean, I couldn't even, it was so long ago. I will tell you though, like our bank records matched our internal records exactly. It looks like essentially one bank deposit got marked as supposed to be inputted on that 42-day post-primary report, and it was put in there completely accidentally. When I was talking to my wife about this, she reminded me that we had our first baby at that point. I don't know whether that had anything to do with it. I mean, we have checks and balances and several sets of eyes on these, so that sort of thing doesn't happen.
You shouldn't let the baby do this.
And you might have been able to do it more accurately than I did that one. And so I can't tell you why that happened, but it did happen. And so, we immediately let Emma and Jonathan and Martha know that, this discrepancy had occurred. We apologized for the error. And, we told them what it was. It was essentially, even though it was 17 transactions, it was one error on one report that we found. And that alone, provided us with an answer at 80% of our discrepancy. It got our discrepancy down to roughly $14,000, which over those 10 years since we have last reported our balance in $11.4 million, I mean, essentially comes out to 1/10 of 1% of a difference. And just to put that in perspective, if the commission, if Emma as just a staff, entered a $1,000 transaction adjustment for a PAC, in order for that adjustment to be that low, it would have to be a PAC with a $1 million transaction. So we weren't happy that we found that error, but we also, by going back 7 years, we found one mistake, and it also kind of made us feel good, except for that one report about our general process. And so we're very grateful that the staff is recommending balance adjustment. We think that that's appropriate. Whatever discrepancy is still left at $14,000, I think probably happened before 2016. That's what our records show. And now if we have a reset balance, that will really allow us to pay much closer attention to that, down to the penny every time we report. That is how we have, this is a very interesting conversation. I mean, we have adjusted how we do our reports now. Now it's not just looking at the bank record and deciding reporting exactly what comes in, what comes out, as based on the bank record and also based on statute. how expenditures and contributions and the date they happen, but also having that extra check, being confident that that cash on hand balance is accurate, that will also allow us to stay more accurate. And as Jonathan and Emma, talked to you about, they're also asking you whether or not you want to consider this 42-day report substantially non-compliant and subject to an eye-popping penalty. And I think if you decide that's non-compliant, I think we probably will maybe be back here at a different meeting to talk more about it. I would ask you to consider, while taking responsibility and telling you that we messed up, which we did, and also acknowledging that I think we should have and could have been more proactive or conscientious about discovering that and reporting that, I would ask you to take, the following mitigating circumstances into consideration. First of all, we are taking acceptance of this, and we are really sorry. Second, this was 7 years ago. It was one error. And as I said, it was 17 transactions, but it really was one error. And I think in terms of offense to the public, we would argue that duplicating a set of contributions that was already accurately and timely reported is one of the lesser offenses in terms of harm to the public when compared to not reporting a contribution at all or not reporting an expenditure. We just think that there's less harm to the public. It's not that there isn't any harm, there is, but we think that there's less harm compared to some of the others. And I think the argument that we could have been more aware of our cash on hand balance and figured out this discrepancy much sooner than we did, we agree. And I think that that is something that we will be very, very conscientious of moving forward. But I also just want to state, and I've said this to Jonathan, I said to Emma, at no point did we know that we had a $68,000 balance discrepancy and just decide not to tell you all. And this conversation with Emma was very interesting because very, very rarely do bank records and ethics filings match up. And that is because of the way the state and the Ethics Commission defines an expenditure and a contribution. It's not uncommon for us to authorize, let's say $150,000 statewide mailing. And, especially when it comes into independent expenditures come into effect, the day that we decide to do that and we make a verbal or written contract with a vendor, that is when that is when that expenditure starts. We have to report that, within 24 or 48 hours, depending on the time of the year. But it may be weeks, if not months, before we actually find out what the precise cost of that mailing is. Oftentimes the post office won't tell us what the postage is until the mail actually arrives at the facility. And then we might not get billed for that and pay it for another couple months. It's also not uncommon for us to check the PO box, get $50,000 in checks, usually not that much, but get $10,000 in checks. And that's the day we receive them, but maybe somebody isn't driving through Augusta to deposit them within a couple of weeks. So very rarely, especially when there's a flurry of activity around a filing deadline at the end of a quarter or reporting period, it's never as easy as just looking at the bank statement and it's just never that easy. There is a more complicated calculation that you can do to get that, and we are going to be doing that from now on, but it just was never that easy. I think, also I'll just say this push, and I think this project that the staff is taking on to make sure that these balances are accurate going forward is a very, very good one. We're very supportive of it, but that has not always been the case. I mean, there have been numerous conversations that we have had with, staff over the years. They have been very honest about, some of the calculation issues. And so we just never really had a high degree of confidence that the cash on hand was accurate, or to be frank, that any cash on hands were really that accurate. I think that all changes now, which is a really good thing. And I think that will help the PACs file more accurate reports. It will help them be able to see errors and be able to do a self-check. I also would love to, I also think if we had made 54 different mistakes over the course of the 7 years, if we had made 54 different mistakes on 54 different reports, I think it's possible that the staff would not be or ask you to consider whether all of those 54 reports were substantially non-compliant. I think the fact that we just made one mistake with one report, and one report, because it was such a big mistake, is substantially non-compliant. I think that might work against us here. And so I would just ask you to consider that was one mistake, 7 years ago. It wasn't 54 different mistakes of $1,000. I think by kind of doing this internal audit, I think it really does show that we're very conscientious about this and take it seriously. And I appreciate everything Jonathan and Emma said. Yeah, and I guess just to conclude, I would just say that I'm sorry we made this mistake. I think we could have handled it better, communicating. Promise to do that going forward.
Thank you. Thank you very much for being here.
Yeah, thank you.
Are there questions for Mr. Smith? Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right, I'll move that we allow the staff to adjust our records to reflect the actual balance in the main House Democratic Campaign Committee's funds. Is there a second?
Second. I can
I'm
second.
sorry. Okay, great. So it's been moved and seconded, and my reasoning is that I really have no appetite for going back to assess a penalty for an inaccurate report. Was 7 or 8 years old. And I think this will settle the issue and allow us to move forward kind of with a blank slate. Anybody have any other thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I just want to add, as you know, in the beginning, we were asking about how often this process might happen in the future. And I feel, of course, we don't want to let PACs think, I don't think this PAC did this, but we don't get caught initially if we just wait 7 years, we won't have to worry about there being a fine. I mean, I certainly don't think that's the case here. And it sounds like the processes we're going to have going forward, means that this issue is very unlikely to come up again. In other words, a stale filing error. So for all those reasons, I agree.
Any other thoughts? Okay, we'll move forward and have a vote. Commissioner Arnold?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
And I'll vote yes as well. So thank you, Mr. Smith, for coming. We appreciate it. Thank you, Emma, for all your work.
And more to come.
But this, I want to note again, that this is going to be really great because going forward, we'll know that if there are any problems or any discrepancies or anything, that they're only as old as today.
Yes,
So that'll help narrowing things down an awful lot.
absolutely. Especially when we're past the time where we're finally 99% confident we're free of math and bugs and balance bugs on our system.
Right, exactly. So that's really great. Thank you again. Moving on to agenda item 3.
Can I make one comment?
Yeah.
A utility line wood chipper just showed up outside my door. Is that, can you guys hear that? Because I can.
No.
Okay,
No.
okay.
But we can hear you.
That's all that's important.
Moving on to item number 3, rule amendments. Mr. Wayne.
So this is a continuation of a rulemaking that the commission conducted in October through December of last year. And in December, the commission provisionally adopted 4 amendments to its rules. And the reason I say provisionally is that these are major substantive amendments. And so the commission needed to go to the legislature for its authorization to finally adopt them. So the legislature considered these in the last couple of months, and they authorized the final adoption of 3 of the amendments, but one of the amendments they preferred to handle statutorily through a chapter law. So with there is a 60-day deadline for the final adoption of these. And so the commission Staff is here today to recommend the changes to Chapter 2, Sections 2 and 6. That relates to our procedures for when we hold a formal hearing. We also recommend final adoption of Chapter 3, Section 2(4)(n). That relates to when we receive qualifying contributions in the forms of checks and money orders from people seeking Maine from Election Act funds. That would formalize our sort of existing staff policy that we would not return those contributions to the candidate. And instead we would deposit them promptly, which is our current practice. And then the staff also recommends the final adoption of Chapter 3, Section 7, subsection 5. That is the rule that says, the amendment says that a candidate could not spend Maine from Election Act funds on post-election parties. And that rule amendment is necessary because there was a 2017 statute change prohibiting that activity, and we are sort of overdue to update our rules to reflect that. And I'll just stop there. So we would recommend final adoption so we can finish this process and file them with the Secretary of State.
Okay, terrific. Are there any questions from members of the commission? Okay, we probably ought to do these one at a time. Right.
You can do it either way.
Oh, so good. All right. Then let's, I move that we adopt the rule changes that were recommended by Mr. Wayne.
Second.
Is there any discussion? Okay, we'll move on to a vote. Commissioner Marvel?
Yes.
Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
I will also vote yes. Terrific. That finishes the work of the commission for today. Does anybody have any other business to bring up? All right, any other motions to make?
To adjourn.
It's been moved that we adjourn. That's not debatable. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, we'll have a vote. Commissioner Marvel? Commissioner Newman?
Yes.
Commissioner Leclerc?
Yes.
Commissioner Hastings?
Yes.
I'll also vote yes. So we stand adjourned. Thank you all for coming and investing your time and efforts.
Thank you. See you
Thank
next
you.
month.
Well, and you ran the meeting perfectly. The electronics worked fabulously.
No,
Thank you.
you.
You just set a record.
It must, could be. Oh, you mean for shortest meeting?
It's got to be right up there.
Could be.
It's gotta be close.
Yeah.
Okay. Don't horse around.
That would
Looking both at the preview and some other things I can see on the other only.
when Mike went here.
Okay.
I am, yes. I'm leaving on the
We have an
14th.
August meeting scheduled.
And I'm not, I'll be
Wednesday.
out, so I'm
Okay.
not totally reachable. But yeah, 14th and then
So I
it's
have
a Monday, I think, right? Yeah, those two.
I was
Oh,
wondering what
sure.
happened actually.
Living in the-
It wouldn't have worked. Yeah, 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 right, right.